we go.
Alrighty.
Awesome. Okay, we are recording.
Sweet, sweet.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, do you want to just like introduce yourself? I know we talked a little bit before about how your band started, but do you want to go over that a little bit?
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. So I guess I'll start from the way beginning.
Hmm.
Um, Finn and I are brothers. We were born in Lexington, Kentucky, but now we live in Amish country, Ohio, which is pretty cool. So I guess we moved here when we were about four. I guess that's relevant. But I'm 2 years older than him. We're brothers, like I said, and I play the guitar and sing. He plays just about any instrument with strings, and he can do a little backing vocals, harmonies, and he plays a harmonica. So I call him our utility man. He does everything for us, and we play country and americana, as I'm sure because of your page. That's why you're interviewing me. But
Yeah.
we started playing together about 3 years ago before COVID. Um, and we only played like 3 or 4 gigs, and then that got shut down because of COVID, obviously.
Mhm.
But right after COVID, we came back. We started doing gigs, and eventually, through just friends of friends and contacts we'd acquired over the way, we were able to go record with a guy named Eric Tuff and Sam in Cincinnati,
Mhm.
and we recorded Mockingbird and Private Before the Fall there, and then we recorded Bench Seat with a guy. Actually, we recorded part of that in Cincinnati, and then the rest of that we did with a guy in Nashville named Chris Latham that we also kind of got in contact with through friends of friends and contacts that we've gathered along the way. And then we did the rest of the album with him.
Okay.
And so the album's actually a mixture between a guy named Eric Tuff and Sam in Cincinnati and Chris Latham in Nashville. But that's where we're at now from the
Okay.
start.
So you mentioned an album. I know the people who follow you on TikTok will have seen like you announced that you're releasing an album on, was it July 3rd?
No, July 1st.
Okay.
The single was June 3rd. The album is July 1st. I confuse that myself all the time, actually.
Okay. Well, very nice. Well, tell me a little bit about your album. Like, what was the thought process behind it? How many, like, how much information have you released already? I don't know if I've seen it all, like what you've put out in public.
Okay.
But yeah, just give us a lowdown on
Yeah, so the album, like I said, we actually kind of started with the single, and that was Mockingbird.
that. Okay.
And that was I wrote all our songs on the album, and
Okay.
that was probably what I thought was the most radio friendly song that we had in our repertoire at that point.
Mockingbird.
Um, so we were just like, let's go to this guy. His name's Eric Tuff and Sam. He runs a studio called Moonlight Studios in Cincinnati, and it's a real small studio in his garage, and it's just him and a guy named Ed Bullock, and they're both really talented musicians, both great at running Pro Tools. And so we went in there, and we had one day, and we got that song done, and then we had a little bit extra time, so we just did a live recording of Pride Before the Fall, which
Okay.
that was one of our more popular songs.
Yeah.
Buttercup. Sorry, my dog's barking.
I,
But yeah, so we did that. And originally that was just a single. We didn't really have any plans of making an album, but we decided to go back to Eric to do Bench Seat, which was our most popular song live. And we went there. We did Bench Seat with him. And then we got hooked up with Chris Latham, and Chris Latham's an incredible producer. He's got a Grammy actually with Guy Clark. He's got a gold record with Joe Nichols. I think
oh
he
wow.
worked on Man with a Memory, which had Broken Heart still on it. Probably his biggest hit.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, we got connected with him, and we went in on Bench Seat. We added steel guitar, and we got hooked up with Steve Henson, he was Randy Travis's steel guitar player for on and off about 30 years, and he does a lot of studio work in Nashville, and
Mhm.
he is probably a top 5 steel guitarist in Nashville, if
Yeah.
not I can't name anybody better. He was incredible, and he was hilarious. He was one of the nicest people I've ever met, and so was Chris. We also uh, hired Duncan Mullins to do session with us, and he's a great bassist who, like Steve, is in the studio every single day. And I'm sure you've heard songs that he's worked on.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he was also all three of those guys were incredibly nice, which was kind of surprising because we were small and we didn't really have any leverage or anything. They had no reason to be nice to us, but they were all extremely kind and funny to work with. And those guys just had a huge input packed on our songs. They all brought it to a new level. And it also helped because we took some of the songs we did with Chris,
Yeah.
brought them back to Eric to work on, and some of the songs with Eric and brought them to Chris, which was great because they're both incredible producers,
Yeah, 2 of
but
them.
they're both very different. Eric is actually mostly like punk and rock,
Oh, really?
pop. Yeah, he does. I don't think he's actually really worked on too much country stuff. He's done a little bit of folk and Americana, but we went to him and he knew what we were looking for, and he was just that good of a producer where he could just be like, "All right, this is what we're gonna do," and we did it, and it was great. And so we took some of his songs and we brought him to Chris, and he added some steel guitar and some country elements that were great.
Yeah.
And then we took some of Chris's stuff back to Eric. We actually had to redub vocals because I completely flopped on vocals on two of the songs when we were in Nashville. So we brought him back to Eric and redid those with him. And Eric's just great at recording vocals,
Mhm.
and that helped elevate our song to a new level. That was great.
Yeah. Well,
So
that's really cool. So one of my favorite parts of country music personally is the writing and the storytelling. And I know especially on Pride Before the Fall, your writing has been incredible. So would you walk us through like a little bit of your thought process behind writing, where your inspiration is? I know you've talked a little bit about it on TikTok, but would you just rehash that?
sure, sure. So really, I mean, there's a lot of people that argue about songwriting,
Oh yeah.
and I mean, everyone's got their own opinion on how to write a great song. But at the end of the day, I think it just comes down to I constantly am thinking about songwriting. Every conversation I have, every thought I have, if I hear something a little profound or a little bit smart, I write it
Mhm.
down. And I like Pride Before the Fall. I mean, I honestly, that was just something where I think I started with the lines, falling feels like flying until you hit the ground,
Mhm.
which is interesting because it's kind of a cliche line. It is profound, but I realized after writing it, I started listening to some music. Chris Stapleton has a song where he talks about how falling feels like flying, and there's a few other people that
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I write, and every songwriter does it where they write lines that other people have used, and that's okay. It's perfectly fine. But like with that song, I start with a line, and I just keep building on it.
Mhm.
And a lot of times it's either a line or a title that I start with. Sometimes I start with concepts. Bench Seat was a concept song. That was that was a story that I had that I thought was kind of interesting, and I just wrote it.
Yeah.
And Mockingbird was actually a mixture between a concept song and a title. I just was like, a mockingbird is a bird that it's called a mockingbird because it mocks the sound of other birds. It can change its sounds. So I was like, well, I can use this as like an idea of someone I'm in a relationship with who's just saying what you're supposed to say but not really meaning it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where that came from. But I would say I have to talk about this. I think the song I'm most proud of is going to be released on the album. It's called Feeling Goodbye.
Mhm.
And I listened to a lot of Midland, and Midland wrote this song that was on their latest album called And Then Some. And
Yes.
I love that song. I think it's brilliant because it's and then some, and then they finish somebody says your name, and then
Mhm.
something happens.
Yeah.
And then it says I miss you and then some. So it's using the I don't know what
Okay,
literary
from a
technique
song
that is,
Brady
but
Smith you mentioned before.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and then some. You've used that
Yeah,
everyone's used that word, that phrase before, and then some, and
absolutely.
I was like, "Wow, I'm gonna do that." So I thought about it for a few days. I'm like, "What play on words can I use?" Because Midland loves their play on words. They
Oh,
do it
yeah.
all the time. I wanted to write a song, not necessarily Midland style, but just that
Mhm.
writing style, play on words. And
Yeah.
I thought about feeling good, bye. So that's how I wrote that song, and I think that's my smartest song I've written, and I think most people have heard it agree, and it'll be on the album, and we'll see how it does. It's a longer song, so I'm hoping it does well. But yeah, I mean, songwriting, all in all, if you ask me what my songwriting process is, I'm just songwriting is not a process, it's more of a lifestyle at this point. It's just
Okay.
something you always have to be thinking about. And you're gonna write a good song, you're gonna write a lot of terrible songs. But
Mhm.
if you're always thinking about songwriting, that's the number one tip I would give people. Just constantly write songs. You're gonna write 20 bad ones in a row, but then
Yeah.
you're gonna write one that's really good. And if you're always thinking about songwriting, that's only a couple weeks it takes to write a good one because you'll be writing so many songs or coming up with so many ideas in your head that one's gonna have to fall in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned that you are not necessarily making music in the style of Midland, but who would you say is sonically is your inspiration, especially in like Nashville or major label artists?
That's such a great question. And the answer is simply we don't, I mean, we draw from so many different people. Finn and I both listen to so much music. I listen to a lot of country. I listen to a little bit of other stuff. For the most part, my playlists are just filled with country. And
Yeah.
Finn listens to a lot of different genres. And because of that, like if you listen to our album, it's going to be a very diverse album. We got 3 or 4 songs that sound really similar, and then we got 3 or 4 songs that each one of them is completely different. And I don't really want to have Midland's got a Midland sound, right?
Absolutely.
Every artist is going to have a sound, and that's okay and that's good. But I don't want to be the next Midland or the next Turnpike Troubadours. As great as those guys are, I want to be my own sound. I want people to compare other bands to us when we're big. I don't feel like Flatland Cavalry, for example, great band. When they came out, everyone compared them to Turnpike
Oh
Troubadours.
yeah.
That's not what I want to be.
Mhm.
And fortunately for Flatland Cavalry, they've gotten to the point where they've surpassed that. They've got their own sound. And I've always thought they did because Cleto Cadero has such an incredible, unique voice. But
Oh
I don't want to be compared to other people.
yeah.
Oh, that's my brother Finn. I guess he's sitting down with us now.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah,
Um. So all right. So we've talked about your band. Now I have some questions for your opinion of country music overall. Um. Actually, before is my sound and audio
yeah, your
clear?
sound audio is great right now. I can hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. Okay. So what's your opinion about the current state of country music? I know that is such a huge question and everyone loves to argue about that. But
Yeah,
would you say we are in a good place right now? Like especially with like as I said before, the major label artists.
man, Finn, I'm gonna ask Finn what he thinks about country music right now first, because he's got a lot to say. I always know. What do you think country music's at? Do you like it?
Yeah, I like it where it's headed somewhere good, but it's recovering from something bad.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
would agree with that.
It's
yeah.
it's in that recovery state. It's kind of like country's in
Actually,
rehab.
let me see if I can flip my camera around so we can go.
Cool,
I
cool.
got the orientation lock on. I'll take that off,
Yeah,
and then let's see. Does that flip us for you?
perfect.
Okay, perfect. Now I can both be on it. So yeah, my answer is a little more in depth. Uh, Country music is in a weird spot right now because of streaming services, and I think that's we're in a new era of country music because you know since the 1960s you can see every decade has its own sound. You had the 60s with Johnny Cash,
Yeah.
and you had the 70s where you're getting into Waylon Jennings and that sort of sound. You got the 80s where you've got Keith Whitley and John Conley, and then you got the 90s with George Strait and Garth Brooks. You got the 2000s with Kenny Chesney and Toby Keith. You got the 2010s, which was the worst decade of country music. I think most people tell you, with like Florida Georgia Line. Um, we're no longer in an era where country music is defined by a cliche or stereotype sound. And that's kind of weird for country music. And that's weird for every genre because that is true of any genre. They go through phases where one specific sound is popular, and that's because it's what radio favored. Radio has always been the number one tool for listening to music, and that's no longer true. We have Spotify. Country music is now divided into 40 or 50 different subgenres. We've got Americana, alt country, country rock, Texas country, red dirt country. I mean, and there's arguments over what is what and who is who.
Mhm.
And there's Nashville country, there's pop country, there's rap country now. There's stuff that to me sounds like a foreign language that's out.
Yeah.
And it's where country is today is it's in a state of limbo where it hasn't really made up its mind of what it is. Country music for a while I almost thought was going to split into two genres, Americana and country. I don't think it's doing that. I think it's actually kind of blending together in the radio.
Yeah.
But man, where is it? What is the state of it? The state of it's almost a mess, but it's a beautiful mess because it's all good and it's like Finn said, radio is getting better. You know, I like Hardy, I like Luke Combs, I like Riley Green.
Yeah.
I no longer turn on the radio and can't find a song that I like. There's still a lot of bad stuff on the radio, don't get me wrong, but
Mhm.
there's a lot of good. And
Yeah.
more than anything, radio just doesn't matter like it used to. And
Oh,
that's weird. And country music's going to react to that. You're going to see a lot of guys rise to the top that never would have risen to the top before. People
yeah.
take advantage of it. And um you're going to see a lot more guys that you never expect to be famous. It's no longer about looking the best
Yeah.
or about having the most curb appeal.
Mhm.
It's now about your sound more than anything, and that's kind of a great place for country music to
Oh,
be.
yeah. I think we're seeing how different artists that probably would not have risen to the top are
Mhm.
going. Like, especially I think of Baby Zimmerman. Like, TikTok and streaming. I mean, like Grady Smith said in a video, he doesn't even have a website,
Yeah,
but he has somehow gotten to the top where Fall in
yeah,
Love is a major hit, and
mhm,
everyone is super hyped for his next single to come out, and I think it's
yeah,
on Friday.
yeah. I
Um,
think it's coming out in the next couple days, right?
yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely don't think we would have seen that, like, such a fast, like, journey to the top without,
Yes.
like, if we
Yeah.
just through traditional radio.
Yeah. I agree, and it's. I mean, Finn and I just had a long discussion about this today about like where we need to head social media wise and TikTok and stuff. And I mean, I can tell you, I've been using. We just got on TikTok about 2 months ago. We had
Yeah,
not been on, but everyone in the industry that we talked to, and we've actually gained a decent amount of connections, which we're thankful for. But everyone we've talked to has always brought up TikTok.
yeah,
And I didn't like TikTok at first, but I said, all right, I'm going to do it. And at this point, I mean, the amount of followers we're getting every day is kind of crazy. It's
yeah,
like 25 a day, which doesn't seem like much until you multiply that by 7 days a week. And it's only growing exponentially.
yeah,
Every new follower we get, it's just we're getting more and more followers every day because of it and more views on our videos. And it's it's very, very different. And it's much in a certain way, it's easier to get lost in the crowd,
oh,
but
yeah,
it's also easier to distinguish yourself if you're good.
yeah,
And that's nice.
yeah. I mean, I've been seeing that a little bit too in my journey as, like, a critic, because on TikTok, I'm not a brand. On TikTok, each one of my videos needs to speak for itself in order to give, the amount like, to gain traction for people to click on my profile. My video can't be, going off of the less like, I think part 2s are a huge thing, but with country music critics and country music artists, people aren't gonna go find the part 2, so you need
Yeah.
the videos need to speak for itself, which is so much different than, like, a loyal fan base, and
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
like, I mean, you can get on Instagram,
Uh-huh.
different streaming services.
Yeah. Finn and I had an argument about that today is like I've always been a little lenient with my videos. I've my perspective is a view and a follower is a follower. And so I post a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily about our band. I post a
Yeah,
lot of stuff about country music in general. But it's such a tough line because we want people to hear our music, but we also want people to like us. So we do that because you know, TikTok's a platform where it's more than just being a band, I think. I think there's if you look, there are a lot of bands with 500 followers who just post their music. And I post our music too, but what I found is that if I mix in some content that isn't necessarily about us, it does really well and those people are drawn to our band through it. So it this social media allows me to have a little bit of fun with playing in my perspectives on country music and almost playing the critic role sometimes and playlists recommending different types of music and in turn getting views from that, and to me that's awesome because I love talking about this stuff anyway
yeah.
and it gets us exposure.
Yeah, when people follow you for one type of video, I mean, as soon as you post that next video, it's going to be on their following page and they're going to see
Hmm.
that. And I mean, that's a direct link to your music. Um,
Exactly.
absolutely. So, okay, along those same lines, what are your guilty pleasures? What are the songs that you would love to hate, but they get stuck in your head, and when you're driving and the windows are up, they might play. You might not skip it.
Yeah. Okay.
What are those songs?
What's the Sam Hunt song that we play sometimes?
Oh, hard to forget.
Yes, Hard to Forget by Sam Hunt. And
Yeah,
Sam Hunt is weird because I do not like his music style, but
yeah.
I have to give him credit. He has some very great songwriting in some of his songs. Hard to Forget's another one of those songs where it's a play on words. It's
Mhm.
saying hard to get, hard to forget. And it is a really smart song. In fact, Finn and I played at our shows. Now we do an acoustic version where we've made it sound more like a 1970s country song with the same lyrics. But
I love it.
when I hear it come on, even though I wouldn't really consider it country, I definitely listen to it because it is a good song.
Yeah,
And the songwriting to me is it overlooks the awful snap track that's playing in the background.
yep, for sure. Now, who would you say your top artists on Spotify are right now?
Well, I use Apple Music, so
Okay,
but
Apple
man,
Music.
okay. Finn, I'll let Finn go first because Finn is a little more diverse than me, and it'll be a little more interesting to hear what his top artists are.
Well, I
Okay.
listen to Spotify, Amazon Music, and Pandora because
You
I
can
don't.
listen to Garth Brooks.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
I could. I
I
guess
think so.
is
On
he on
Amazon. He's on Amazon, I think. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
wow. Um, I'd say I'm gonna go with Pandora because that's what I do most of my recreational listening on. I'd
Okay.
say, uh, actually, Morgan Wallen is
Oh,
up there. Morgan Wallen, Co Wetzel, uh, Tyler Childers, and and Trampled by Turtles. Those are the country ones. I listen to a lot of rock
wait,
too.
hold on. Trampled by Turtles?
Yeah, yeah, a lot of. I'm a mandolin player, so by
Okay.
nature, I'm a big bluegrass fan.
I don't know if I've heard that.
Really?
They're
Oh
good,
man.
We might just introduce you to
The
whole
world of
new-
cosmic bluegrass is so good. Uh Trampled by Turtles, The Kitchen Dwellers,
Yeah,
Billy,
that.
Billy Strings is somewhere
Yes,
in
I
there.
I I know him from the Luke Combs song, 6 Feet
Oh
Under,
yes.
Mhm.
and
You should
that's how I was introduced to him.
yeah, you should I'm not sure if you listened to this yet, but you should look up Dust in a Baggie and there
Okay,
is a guitar part in that he plays that just blows anybody that listens to it, it'll blow them away.
okay.
But
People know him more for being a really good guitarist,
yeah,
a really good acoustic guitarist.
insane. But yeah, look up Billy Strings or Trampled by Turtles on Spotify and just play like their top songs,
Okay.
and they're really good. But yeah, I mean he's got a diverse taste, a lot of bluegrass, rocky stuff lyrics in there. I'm a little less so. Right now, man, it's so hard to say. I've listened to that Zach Bryan album a lot, so he's definitely up there.
Oh, yeah.
Um, I really like. Have you heard Drew Parker before?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, yeah. Drew Parker, I listen to a lot of Drew Parker. He's got an amazing voice, and his sad stuff is just out of this world good.
Yeah.
I always listen to a lot of Keith Whitley, so he's
Yep.
always up there. Surprisingly, I listen to a lot of Billy Joel.
Okay.
He's
Okay.
a really great songwriter and a pretty good
Yeah.
musician. I mean, great musician. So I actually listen to a lot of Billy Joel,
Yeah,
and
absolutely,
it probably Turnpike Troubadours or Whiskey Myers, one of those two is stuck in there too. So,
for sure.
but I go through phases. I listen to a lot of stuff at once, so it's hard for me to put a finger on what I'm listening to most. Right now, it's Zach Bryan because he has a new album. But any other given time of the year, it's probably whoever put out the most recent release. Probably.
Okay. Yeah. Um, okay. So, a hot topic in the country music world is surrounding album releases. So, would you say you prefer, and you can also go into a little bit about how you are releasing your album, but would you say you prefer an album rollout more like Hicks Take Two, where it was one song every Friday for a good 6 to 8 weeks? Or would you prefer it more like Flower Shops, where um, like Ernest, he said
Everything at
he was making
once.
an announcement, and then he dropped 3 singles, and,
Yeah.
like, other than Flower Shops, those were the 3 singles of the album.
Okay. Well, it comes down to what I prefer and what makes the most sense. I
Yeah,
think what Hardy did was I'm not Hardy. I can't speak for why he did it. I don't know if it was more gimmicky or experimental. I think it was an experimental thing. And here's why is that Spotify is probably the biggest tool, especially for newer artists like us.
mhm,
It's the biggest tool for getting through your music. I'm not going to include social media in this, but musically getting the most viewers at once, and that's because of their
yeah,
playlist curation tool. When you release a song or when you release an album, you can add one song on that release to basically you pitch it to their editors
mhm,
and they might end up putting it on a Spotify curated playlist. It doesn't happen a ton. It's pretty rare. Hasn't happened to us yet, although you can't do it on your first release. So Bench Seat, I think we released it too quickly for them to really pitch it. We will pitch one song on our album, but that for artists is a huge tool because those playlists get a lot of streams.
yeah,
So there are smaller bands that I know of that do not release albums. They release singles over and over because they want each song to be pitched to those editors.
yep,
I don't know if that's what Hardy was doing, what he had in mind. I kind of doubt it because he doesn't need those playlists to succeed. I think for him, it was more just kind of experimenting, fiddling around, seeing how much exposure, how much hype he can get for it. And I think it kind of backfired because I think in hindsight, he could have gotten a lot more streaming from releasing it at once, like Zach Bryan did or like Flower Shops.
yeah,
But it depends on where you're at. If you're a new artist, I completely understand releasing singles slowly.
yeah,
Completely understand it. I don't love it. I wanted to release an album because I felt like there is that potential of it blowing up at once,
mhm,
especially with TikTok and stuff. I feel like there is a high still a potential of your if you release a bunch of songs at once, which is what we're doing, it exploding.
yeah,
And there's also a potential of singles, each of them gaining a little bit of traction until you get to the point where you can prime yourself for a sort of overnight success
yeah,
in
yeah,
terms.
carry
But
those.
personally, I much rather would have an album release at once as a listener.
Okay, yeah,
I, it's just to me it makes more sense. It's easier to follow. I try to keep up with Hicks Tape. It's just one of those things that it's hard to kind of follow a 20 song, essentially double album every week. It's just
30 different artists, yeah.
so much you just forget about it. And I think Hardy did that as an experiment more than anything. I've got to assume that he was
Yeah,
thinking like, let's see how people react to this. And I don't think people liked it. And
yeah,
that's okay. More power to him. I'm actually glad he experimented with that because
yeah,
it shows other artists how they balance the Spotify curation, releasing an album and stuff like that. So
yeah.
it was a useful tool for all of us.
Yeah, and I mean, with Hardy, like, he can afford to experiment. He has that bandwidth, and he has
Yes.
those
Yes.
dedicated, loyal fans that
Hmm.
if
He's a very
he will
experimental
be
guy.
fine.
Like his last song, Sold Out, that's like alt rock. I mean, that's
Oh,
barely country.
straight out, yeah.
It's and it's not a bad song either.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, he
I saw
loves experimenting. He has, I believe, he's got a degree in songwriting, which means I'm sure he played around with a lot of genres of music when he was learning that stuff in
yeah,
college. And that's just if it's as an artist, it's fun to play around with stuff like that. And when you've got the fan base he does, and
mhm,
you've got the freedom to do that,
yeah,
that's cool. That's fun, and I'm glad to see people doing it.
absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, along the lines of Sold Out, I saw him live a few weeks ago. He opened with Sold Out. It was, like, the amount of energy that that song brought because
Yeah.
Ernest had opened for him, so the
Hmm.
amount of the changeover
Oh yeah.
needed a lot of energy and Sold Out
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
yeah, and
Absolutely.
I think, like, with the whole Co-Bros thing, like, I think Co-Wetzel is very similar to the
Very
style
yes.
of
Very
Sold Out,
much.
and I think that that's Hardy's audience. I mean, I think
Hmm.
20 some dudes who drive a Ford F-250, you know, like that is his audience.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I
Very
agree.
similar, but
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so one last question for you, and we'll close out. Um, are there any other small artists that you think people need to know? Because I mean, as a critic, that is really my heart and my passion for my page. That is why I created it. I want to introduce people to smaller artists, and I want to like have other people watch them grow. I think that that's such a fun experience as a listener to watch your favorite band
Yeah.
grow.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Let me actually swipe away here and open up a playlist I've got. I actually have a playlist of small artists. And I'm trying to think of a name that I'm forgetting. But yeah, I mean, there's a couple. Starting off with my favorite, Ian No.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard him if you follow Grady Smith, but Ian No doesn't get a lot of press. He doesn't do a lot of social media, but he's really good. Um, there's a guy named Arlo McKinley. He's out of
Yeah.
Cincinnati. Arlo McKinley's getting a little bit more press than he used to, and he's really good. He's really great.
Yeah.
Another guy is Eric Dillon.
Okay.
He's more of a songwriter. He writes for Riley Green and a few other people. He actually did a song with Luke Combs. But his stuff, it's a little less country. I would consider it more close to what Hardy does.
Okay.
But it's really good. And then finally, I'll go with. I mean, there's the obvious ones that everyone would say, like Cole Chaney and Logan Halstead, a
Mhm.
lot of those guys out of Eastern Kentucky. But
Yep.
one I don't hear a lot is a girl named Jenny Tolman.
Okay.
She's really witty. She has some pretty funny songs, and she, um, I don't want to say, she kind of reminds me of like she's more like let me think. She's a little bit like Casey Musgraves when I
Okay.
think about it. Not completely, but she's kind of got that. Not exactly your mainstream country female singer. She's a little bit more out there, a little bit kind of funnier, kind of witty, a little more in your face in a certain way,
Yeah.
but but really brilliant, and I love her stuff. So I would I would recommend Jenny Tolman to a lot of people, especially
Yeah.
everyone by names still has somewhat of a following or a career as a songwriter or something like that.
Yeah.
She's the only one that I have genuinely not heard anything about her in mainstream.
Okay. Well, I will check her out.
Yeah, she's really good.
I love finding more, especially females in country music, like the
Yeah.
smaller artists. It's definitely a different. Um,
Hmm.
so, but yeah. Well, thank you so much for chatting. I'm gonna turn off the recording.
Awesome.
Let's see if I can figure out how to do this. Okay, here we go.